Hello and welcome to this RapidDeploy overview tutorial. Today we're going to look at the RapidDeploy architecture, followed by a look at some of the RapidDeploy tool concepts, and then we're going to look at server orchestration, release pipelines, and job execution. Okay, so first of all let's have a quick look at the RapidDeploy architecture. And I've got a diagram here which gives a basic overview of the architecture. In the center you can see the blue box with the automation framework engine within it. And this really is the heart of RapidDeploy. It's a Java web application that you can just download as a zip file, unzip and run. And within that Java web application comes automatically bundled Tomcat 9 and also an internal HSQL database. Now, that database you can replace in your RapidDeploy production environments with Oracle or DB2 or another enterprise database, and we strongly advise you to do that. But for evaluation purposes, you can easily use the HSQL database. The engine that comes with that really controls designing our orchestrations, so our server orchestrations, what is run on a server to do a deployment. The identity and access management, so the identity federation with LDAP repositories, Active Directory, Atom or any other LDAP repository. All of the activity and audit is done in the framework, all of the reporting and creating the environment models, so the different models of what environments we're trying to create. You access that automation framework via a user interface, which you can see above the automation framework. And that has dashboards for management, approvals, pipeline reviews. It also allows you to look at the environment models that you've created and edit them. It allows you to manage and edit your security profiles, your target definitions, your deployment routines, and your data dictionaries. The data dictionaries are the name-value pairs that define differences between environments. We also have a web services interface that you can interact with RapidDeploy with, and a command line interface. And then at the bottom here you can see we've got the plugins box. Now RapidDeploy, all of the functionality really to do deployments is added via plugins. These fall into four main types. There are target plugins, transport plugins, cloud plugins, and toolchain plugins. The target plugins are basically plugins for individual product targets, such as, for example, WebSphere, WebLogic, Tomcat, Oracle, DB2, any tools that you might want to deploy to, those are the targets. Transport plugins, we have the two boxes here on the right, Agent and SSH. These are how we connect to our target servers to run deployments. RapidDeploy supports Agent and agentless with SSH. What you can do with the agent, you can do with SSH and vice versa. You can secure the agent with SSL and a username and password. Then we come to the cloud plugins. These enable us to integrate RapidDeploy into cloud providers such as VMware, Amazon Web Services, Azure, etc. And they allow us to stand up and start and control cloud infrastructure as part of our deployment. So you will have tasks that enable you to run things on target servers to interact with your cloud provider, and you will also have within the tool the ability to back your server definitions, i.e. the definitions of what we deploy to, with cloud providers. And then we have toolchain plugins. Toolchain plugins enable us, as part of our deployment or as part of building our tooling or backing RapidDeploy, to integrate with various products in the toolchain. So these might be things like SCM products, software configuration management products like Git, Subversion, Rational Team Concert, Team Foundation Server. They might be artifact repositories like Maven, Nexus, Artifactory, and many, many other tools that you can interact with. Okay, so let's move on. Let's now have a look at the tool concepts. Okay, so let's first have a look at the components of RapidDeploy. There are four main components to RapidDeploy. The first of these is the resource library. And the resource library is a collection of external resources. And so it's the things, it's the what that we actually deploy. The second component is our target infrastructure. This is the where we deploy. The third component is the project, and this defines how we deploy. In other words, what are the steps we run on the infrastructure to deploy those resources? And the final one is the job plan, and this really defines when we deploy, not only in terms of time, but in terms of when we deploy in relation to other things that we need to deploy as part of our route to live. So let's start with the resource library then. The resource library panel basically has a list of external resources, and these resources can be consumed by any project. So any resources that you create, any project can subscribe to them by just literally selecting them from a pick list, which we'll see in a minute. And each resource is a pointer to a location where the artifacts reside. Now those artifacts could reside locally in a local file system or a local folder, or could be remote file systems or folders, could be in an SCM repository such as Git, Subversion, TFS, etc., or an artifact repository such as Maven or Nexus or Artifactory, for example. So here we've just got an example of 3 resources, one of which is a Git repository which contains a set of scripts. One is a Nexus library which contains a web application, a WAR file, and one is a Maven repository which contains some Tomcat 8 binaries that we might want to deploy. And so those can be shared or not between our projects. Then we come to look at infrastructure. So the infrastructure panel is a list of logical servers, so that's server display names. Now, each server display name definition basically consists of one or more IP addresses or some cloud infrastructure which might spin up 20 different servers or whatever, and also a definition of how we connect to those. And in RapidDeploy we've got 2 ways of connecting. One is SSH and one is via an agent. And each server can have multiple installations on it. So to take the example of the resources we had before, a specific server might have a Tomcat 8 installation, it might have some scripts installed on it, and it might have a web app installed on it that's actually installed inside that Tomcat 8 definition. Okay, and then we have the project. This is the how we do our deployment. And this defines the steps to run on each target, and a target is a combination of server and installation and then configuration. We'll come to that in a moment. So this is achieved using our Orchestration Designer. So this is a view of what's in RapidDeploy. It's the Orchestration Designer for a particular project. And it has a number of steps that you can see in the dark blue, and they're interleaved with various things that you can do, like failure branches, so what to happen in the event of a failure, if tasks, conditionals, loops, etc. that you can have, and environment-specific branches, so you can say, well, do something on one type of target and do something different on a different type of target. Okay, so on the project you can also choose which resources you're going to select. As we discussed, we've got our resource library. The available resources are here shown on the left, and on the right these are the resources that we've just selected for this particular project. So this is just deploying the WAR file. And we also define our deployment targets. So a target is specifically a server and an installation with the configuration for that specific server and installation. So why do we need 3? Well, we've got a target server, which is a set of IP addresses we deploy to. We've got an installation, which in this case might be Tomcat 7 or Tomcat 8, or let's say, for example, it's a set of scripts we want to run. Then we need to have a separate configuration, because we might have a script that we run that in one configuration runs with one set of command line arguments and one set of environment variables, and in another configuration runs with a different set of command line arguments and a different set of environment variables. So that defines, so we'd have 2 entries in here with the same script that we'd be running, so the same server and installation, but with different configurations. And all of these belong to environments. So an environment is a logical collection of server installation combinations. So for example, we might have a development environment, or let's say, in this case, we've got a nice one here, Tomcat Test. That might have a Tomcat 7 binary installation. It might have a WAR file that we deploy. It might have some scripts that we run, and it might have a standalone Java application that we run. Now, all of those might be separate installations on different servers, but they all belong to the same logical environment. Okay, when we've created our project with our orchestration designer, we've chosen our resources, we've defined our deployment targets, and we've created our configuration, we then create a point-in-time package in the project which brings all of those things together. So pulls them all in, pulls the external resources in, pulls in the configuration, pulls in the orchestration designer, and creates a point-in-time snapshot. And we can go backwards and forwards through those point-in-time snapshots. You can see those here versioned. So that you can just deploy a version, say here version 007, that's the latest version, or you could redeploy an earlier version, and that would put the environment back to the way that it was when we actually created that version. Okay, so just a quick summary now. We have our project, and that project has a number of targets, and those targets are built up from the server definitions that we've got in RapidDeploy, so the infrastructure, the installations that are on that infrastructure that are also defined in RapidDeploy, and then the configuration for each of those installations, and there may be multiple configurations for each installation that define the variables and the differences between those environments that we want to run. So that configuration, as I said before, might be a set of environment variables and command line parameters in the case of scripts. In the case of a WAR file, it might be a bunch of parameters around how that WAR file is deployed. In the case of a binary installation for Tomcat, it might be heap sizes and goodness knows what else, a lot of other possible configuration items. Okay, so now we're going to move on to server orchestration, release pipelines, and job execution. So firstly, we're going to look at the project again. And here we can see the server orchestration designer that we've already discussed. So as I said before, this is a blueprint that runs on all targets for this project. We can add tasks to this by selecting from a palette of tasks, and the tasks that we have available, and we can see them here in this list, some tasks, will depend on which plugins we have in store. We also have on the right hand side some help about all of the fields of this task and a general overview and description. And we can just easily add a task in to the orchestration designer wherever we want it. And these are tasks for functionality, and they might be very simple, like create a folder or create a file, or they might be very complicated, like do a WebSphere deployment to a particular cell, and that might contain a lot of information about what we actually want to do. We also have the ability to add conditionals and loops in here into this orchestration designer, and here we've got an if task. We can see we're just checking an output from a previous task, and if it's true we're doing one thing, and if it's false we're doing something else. We can also add failure branches, so what do we do if a certain task fails? We can subscribe tasks to existing failure branches or create new ones for tasks. We can make different calls to tasks depending on what target we're running on. So generally speaking, we want to run all the tasks on all the targets in our route to live. That would be the normal way of doing things, because what we do in one environment we want to repeat in another. But sometimes we need to recognize that there are some environments that we only want to run things in. So for example, in production we might do a last minute check against a change management system to make sure a ticket's in a certain state before we allow the deployment to run. We only want to do that in production. In a development environment, we might have a task that shuts down all the firewalls before we start running that orchestration on that server, and we certainly wouldn't want to do that in production. We'd only want to do that in our very early development environments. Okay, so when we've added the task, we can configure it, and we just fill in all the values that we want to put in there. So you can see in there we've got the TW automation jar path. This is a DB Maestro task. And we can hard code some values in there. We can use environment variables, so that's a built-in RapidDeploy variable there of archive root, which always points to the expanded archive of the deployment package on the target server. There are many built-in environment variables. You can also use variables in the same form that are output from previous tasks. So any output from any previous task can be used in any later tasks. And we can also use values which are data dictionary values. Now these are at, and then a variable name at, and we define those for each of the targets, and we've already spoken about targets being the configuration of the environment-specific values we want to set for a particular run of this environment neutral orchestration designer in a particular target. We can just add data dictionary values there and then set those for each of our targets that we want to run in if they're different, or we can set them at project scope and then they'll only be overridden by the targets if we put different values in for the targets. Okay, so let's take that server orchestration and let's do that. Let's create some data dictionary values, our variables that are different in each server, and inject them into the server orchestration. So here in the development environment, we're injecting just very simply a URL, a username, and a password for the database for this deployment. And then we do the same thing in our test environment. So this is a different target now. This is our test target. And we've got different data dictionary values that we're injecting. And the same for our production environment. So again, some different data dictionary values. So we've got our 3 targets. We've got our orchestration designer. Now what we're going to do is put those targets into a pipeline. Okay, so in RapidDeploy we use the pipeline designer and we create a pipeline, and a pipeline is just a list of targets that we want to run in the order we want to run them with pipeline steps in between. Okay, so the pipeline steps that we can have here, we've got a manual one, a REST call, and an auto one. There are many different pipeline steps, and they depend again on which plugins you've got installed. But you can just add whatever you want. You can add multiple pipeline steps between each project target. And also here we've got an approval that you can see. So we spoke about environments previously being combinations of different server installations. And an environment can have an approval group associated with it, or more than one approval group. And then a user from each approval group will need to approve that deployment before it can be deployed into that environment. Okay, here what I'm doing is adding another component to the pipeline. So this is a different project with a different set of targets, but those targets we've got match the targets that we have for the first component. So we're running some script and then we're running the schema update. And we can see we've added that in. So in this case, the 2 project targets in development run in parallel. We then have a REST call, then another parallel 2, and then another parallel 2. And you can build this up how you like. You know, you can add parallel or serial jobs. You can branch the jobs and whatever you want to do. What we've also got here is a version of each component that we're deploying, and it is locked for each target in the pipeline. So if we have a pipeline that's going to deploy the script demo and the schema, we've got a version for the script demo and a version for the schema. Of course, they don't have to have the same version number. In this case, they do, but they don't have to. And that version is going to be deployed all the way through to production. Okay, so now we can take this pipeline and customize it to add some rollbacks and some failure branches and so on. What we've got here is we've got the special versions that we can use for rollback. There's a rollback version, which is the N-1 version that was deployed to that environment. We've also got the special version, new version, which means at the start of this pipeline, create a new deployment package and increment the version number before you start the deployment. And we've got a latest version, so just deploy whatever the latest version is. Quite often when you're testing, you just want to have a pipeline that deploys the latest version so that you don't have to have it create a version as you're going along. So here, every pipeline that we have can have either 0 or 1 rollback pipeline. When you first create it, it will create the pipeline exactly the same as the actual pipeline, putting in all the same project targets and steps, but it will just use the rollback version. You can then edit this to reduce the size. Quite often you won't want to roll back to the development and test environments, only production. So you can put those in. And this rollback pipeline is called only in the case where you've gone through the ordinary pipeline right to the finish node that you can see up in the top right there. And then you find that you have an issue in your production environment. You can then click a one-click rollback, which will invoke this rollback pipeline. We've also got then failure branches here. You can see one failure branch set, but you can set a failure branch anywhere. And this will say, in the event that this project target fails, what do I do? Well, in this case, we're again running a rollback, but you can run anything. You can run an entirely different project if you want. That's a rollback project that does something specific in the event of a rollback. You can create as many failure branches as you want, and you can subscribe any of the project targets that we've got there to any failure branch. Okay. So now if we take this pipeline and we save it and we version it, we call it version of the pipeline 001, we can then copy this pipeline and just change the component versions. So all we have to do is change the version once of the script demo and the version of the schema update, and then we save that as an entirely new pipeline, version 002. And then we can run this second pipeline behind the first pipeline if we want to. Should be noted that once you're running a pipeline, that pipeline can't be rerun whilst it's in progress. So that's why you would then create a separate pipeline with a different version, and that can run behind the first pipeline. Okay, so when we run the pipeline, what do we see in the tool? Well, we see the pipeline running in real time as it runs through. And if we click on any of the individual project targets, we can see that project target as it runs through as well. With its Orchestration Designer, you can see that moving through the tasks as it runs. We can also look at the console if we wish to see the actual logging output in real time. And then after it's finished, we can always view it, so forevermore we can go in there and view how that ran. We can see the pipeline as it looked at the time. We can see all of the individual project target jobs that were run. We can highlight one of those and click on the job, pull that job up. On the left-hand side, we can see what tasks were run. On the right-hand side, we can see what files were copied to the target and then the tasks that were run. And we can click on any task. Perhaps if there's a failure task where you'd see that progress bar would show up in red at the point that it failed. If you wanted to drill right down to see what had gone wrong, you can just click on that link and it will just bring up the log. You can also view the whole logs if you wish to. Okay, so thanks for watching this quick overview of RapidDeploy. In the second part of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is go through all of this again, but actually inside the tool. So my name is Richard Bettison, and thanks for watching.